we did research, we did focus groups with top women, with our GMs. And what we found from the women was that when they played and competed at the highest levels, all of our players wear headsets. I mean, if you're going to play at an elite level, you have to have a headset and communicate with your teammates. And what happened was, as soon as they kind of identified as a woman with a woman's voice, they got past the ball less. They were harassed at times. It was a kind of a toxic environment for them, and so they were getting past the ball less often than their male counterparts. And so, as a result, if we're evaluating statistics, of course, their statistics are going to be less if they're not getting as many opportunities. And so, so we then in season 2, we worked with our analytics company to start analyzing players, how effective they were when they actually got the ball.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
Doing creative work can be kind of lonely, and that's why we built the Unmistakable Listener Tribe. The tribe is a community for professionals to connect and support each other. Everything is designed to help you grow your business and share what's working and what isn't. And that's true whether you're a business owner or an artist. You'll get access to feedback, live conversations with guests, and so much more. By joining the tribe, you become part of a community of creators who all support each other, and it's completely free. Hopefully I'll see you there. Visit unmistakablecreative.com/tribe to join. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/tribe. Brennan, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Of course, Srini. Great to meet you, and I'm excited to chat.
I am absolutely thrilled to have you here. So I actually found out about you by way of our former guest, Scott, who was the CEO of the Philadelphia 76ers. And when he told me that you're the commissioner of the NBA 2K League, I thought, yes, I absolutely have to talk to him. I play this damn game every single day, and my roommate is kicking my ass, so maybe you can help me solve that problem. But all joking aside, before we get into what you do, I want to start by asking, what did your parents do for work, and how did that end up shaping the choices that you've made throughout your life and your career?
Wow, great question. So two very different paths. So my father was the CFO of a hospital at a very young age. I think in his late 20s, he was the CFO of a hospital in Long Island, New York. And I can remember him taking me to work sometimes, and I was always blown away at just how he just knew everybody. I mean, from, walking in the back entrance, he knew the maintenance staff, he knew the CEO, he just knew everybody, and he was just friendly with everyone. And that always stuck out to me as a pretty cool trait. So that was my dad. And I'll get into I'll connect the dots between him and my mom in a second. But my mom, so I am the youngest of 6 kids. We all grew up, I grew up in Long Island, like I said, and my mom actually was a nurse, went to nursing school, and then essentially when she had my oldest brother, stopped. And she was a mom for, roughly 16 years. She was focused on raising her family and being a mom, and an incredible one, with homework and everything else. She was always kind of super, super attentive. And then when I went to kindergarten, she actually went back to being a nurse and doing, working for a home care agency as a nurse. And then, she was putting in so many hours. When I was a freshman, sophomore in high school, so, fast forward, that's about 10 years or so from when she started going back to work, her and my sisters, decided, listen, why don't you start your own home care agency? And so my mom did just that. And my dad actually helped her. He was at a different hospital in Connecticut. Unfortunately, his job didn't work out. And so he ended up becoming the CFO of my mom's home care agency. And so, I mean, talk about a remarkable, I'm obviously, my dad was an incredible executive, and my mom, to watch her go from, totally committed to being a mom and raising kids, 6 kids at that. And then starting your own business and being an incredibly successful executive. and I will say, like, a really good business leader for someone who had very little practical business experience. But, just seeing her build relationships and, and just hustle and lead by example, and I will say being an incredibly strong example of a woman in business, I will say, I mean, it was a pretty powerful kind of foundation I was given.
Yeah. Wow. So I have to ask about, 6 kids. What did growing up in such a big family teach you about navigating relationships, human behavior, and out of morbid curiosity, what's the age gap and which sibling are you closest to and why?
Yeah, so there's 11 years between the oldest and youngest. We're the Brady Bunch, so there's 3 boys and 3 girls. I'm the youngest. I guess I'm Bobby. So as far as closeness, I think I'm probably closest to my second oldest brother. We were kind of similar in terms of, our competitiveness and just, our drive probably. And then your other question was about just kind of interacting in relationships.
Yeah, I mean, a family of 6 is massive. I mean, I only have one sibling, so I always wonder this about people who have huge families.
Well, massive family, but like I would say, like tight quarters. I mean, we were, we had all the kids shared one bathroom, and there was all the boys were in one bedroom, and my 3 sisters shared two other bedrooms. So it was tight. I slept in one of those beds that had it was a pull out drawer that I slept in. I think the biggest thing I learned, and this is something I almost had to unlearn, was how we communicated. Like, in that big of a family, communication was so passionate and like interactive, and like if you didn't lean in, you weren't heard. And so, really kind of like, we would also just the way we were set up kind of family wise and how we interacted and communicated with each other, we would have just brawls and like, and we'd be very argumentative and passionate, but then like, it melted away. The second you were done with it, it was over, and you were back to being family. And so I actually probably had to adjust a little bit in how I communicated to people who might have grown up in normal households that didn't have that, where, I could get after it and like, banter with somebody. And then just like 2 seconds later, I was fine. Like I didn't mind if they had kind of come at me a little bit hard. But in normal society, I guess I had to make that adjustment.
Yeah. Well, so, it's funny. You mentioned your mother going from being a mother of 6 kids to, starting a business to becoming an executive. And there's this quote that immediately came to my mind when you said that. Have you ever seen the TV show Brothers and Sisters with Sally Field?
No, and I'm an avid content consumer, so no, I'm bummed.
Okay, so there's this quote where she, not to ruin it for anybody, but she ends up, losing her husband at the very beginning of the series, and she goes in to pitch some investors on a business idea for some sort of center that she wants to open. And, they basically question her lack of experience. And so she goes out to dinner with one of the investors who only agrees to meet her because of her husband who had passed away, who had built this very successful business. And he basically questions her experience. And in response, she says, I organized the schedules of 5 extremely well-rounded children. I ran carpools, bake sales, and bluebird groups. I negotiated, coddled, and mandated all at the same time, not to mention what I had to do for my husband to keep him happy and productive. And I did all of this without taking a sick day. The problem is no one values the experience of a stay-at-home parent, which is truly a shame because running this big enterprise, as you put it, would be a day at the beach for me. And so I love that. That's probably my favorite moment in the show. And what I wanted to ask you is, what does it take for somebody to build that within themselves, that level of sort of conviction and resourcefulness?
I think my guess is that, my parents came from, I would argue, what is one of the coolest generations of parents, in one of the coolest ones in history, in terms of, for them, all of my grandparents came over from Ireland, kind of came to the US and really started their lives and like didn't have much to work with, and they just made it happen. And so I think that generation, at least for me, I don't know, and there's obviously been books written about that generation, but I think they all installed this sense of, just get it done. I don't want to hear your excuses. And so I think, my mom had that installed in her by her parents and just seeing them operate. And so I think that was a big piece of it. And listen, and I don't know what when or how it was installed in her, but she just had this, she had an incredible work ethic. I guess to use a sports analogy, both on and off the court. I mean, she went 100% plus at work, but then also she didn't come home and complain, oh, I worked all day. Like, you got to take care of this. She was at all my basketball games. She was always present. She was, pushing me to work hard on my studies. It was, and my dad did too. My dad was also, and I would say probably to his credit, he was a probably more balanced executive than I might be now, in terms of he left the office at 5 o'clock and he was home and we would be playing catch or playing basketball together. And he really did a good job of being present as a dad while also being an executive.
Wow. So you mentioned playing basketball. It's funny because I've mentioned this on the show before. I played basketball for 2 seasons in 7th and 8th grade. In 7th grade, I was the most improved player, which just meant I was the shittiest player on the team, which is not apparently the case in the NBA. When somebody is the most improved player, they're badass. I believe at one point Jimmy Butler was. But what I'm curious about is what piqued your interest in sports and how old were you when you started playing basketball?
Oh, I was a sports nut from the very beginning. And that's where I had 2 older brothers and my dad that were all sports nuts. I mean, we were going to Mets, Islanders, Knicks. It was a year round obsession. It was just whatever season it was. That's what sport we were following. So yeah, early on, I was a kind of traditional football in the fall, basketball in the winter, baseball in the spring from, through 8th grade. And then I just got focused on basketball because it was probably the one I was best at. So yeah, I was obsessed with it. And I was my family makes fun of me. I was like an 80-year-old man when I would wake up in the morning and I'd walk out in the driveway, get the newspaper, Daily News or whatever we were getting delivered. And I read the sports section cover to cover while eating my cereal. That was what I did and literally probably from 6 or 7. It was bizarre. Wow. And I also again, to make myself sound like a nerd, I would read the sports almanac, and I was always obsessed with statistics and just the history of sports. So it was all, I don't know what, I guess my intellectual curiosity pushed me in that direction, but I was always super engaged with sports.
This episode of The Unmistakable Creative is brought to you by ThoughtWorks, a global technology consultancy that's hiring senior and lead developers, data engineers, infrastructure consultants, and more to join them in their roles across the United States. It's pretty clear that last year changed our working lives forever, and maybe it made you realize that you were ready for a change. At ThoughtWorks, they challenge curious minds to make a real impact, get to know them, and discover how you can make your mark in tech. At ThoughtWorks, you're free to seek the most ambitious challenges, free to change career paths, free to use technology as a tool for social change, and free to be yourself. They're looking for change makers, opportunity creators, status quo shakers, ThoughtWorkers. And if you're listening to The Unmistakable Creative, that's probably you. Learn more and apply at thoughtworks.com/careers. Again, that's thoughtworks.com/careers.
Yeah. Well, so as somebody who didn't continue playing sports in high school, which to this day I think is one of my regrets, because I feel like every single person I've ever talked to who was a athlete on a team in high school swears by the benefits of it, regardless of whether it led anywhere or not. For parents who are listening, and particularly for parents who are stuck with kids like me who are athletically inept, what would you say to them about encouraging their kids to play sports?
Well, okay, so I'll say this as a person now who oversees an esports league, I would say I would encourage them to compete. Because I can tell you, somewhat more personal to me is, I have a son who has special needs, and so he wasn't able to compete on the athletic field for quite a while, and now he does now swim for his high school, and it was the first time he'd ever been on a sports team. And so it definitely, I love watching him be a part of a team, and it's incredible. And so, but for him and I, our equivalent of like my dad taking me to see a Mets game and sit there and talk about like what was going on at life and school and having that kind of uninterrupted time together. Our equivalent was when he turned 5, I think it was 5, and he's now 15 to put it in perspective. When he turned 5, my wife got us gaming chairs. And so if you came to our house on a weekend, you would see us playing games in many cases together, kind of playing a game at the same time or playing 2K or playing one of his kind of more action games we play together. And to this day, we still play 2K, and oftentimes at night we'll play Fortnite together. So it's for us, that was our equivalent. And he learned competing, I think, a lot through gaming actually. And so, I do think, gaming is a great equalizer for, if you don't necessarily have all the physical tools to compete on an athletic field, your whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to go deeper into that because I think that we have sort of two narratives around video games, right? It's kind of like, oh, video games make kids lazy and inept, and you hear things like, oh, Grand Theft Auto causes violence, which I don't believe any of that to be true. But I, of course, am biased because I've been playing video games, I think, as far as I can remember, from the original Nintendo. Which I'm curious about. How old were you when you started playing video games?
I was an Atari kid, so. Okay. I would say probably first grade. And my oldest brother, that was where he and I were super tight that way. Like we were the two gamers in the house. My middle brother didn't play video games at all. He never got into it, but that was our thing. And so, yeah, I was an early adopter to video games.
Yeah. Well, so I think that one of the things I wonder, and I've asked a couple of different people this. We had this guy, Jeff Harry, here who talked about the importance of play. And you as the commissioner of the 2K League, obviously, clearly probably think there are positive benefits to video games. So what are they? I mean, because you've probably been able to see this over a long stretch of time and have a bigger sample size than the average person.
Well, I think listen, if you ask me this question and in my mindset, when I first started playing video games, 1980 or so, it's just so different now because your video game experience now compared to when I started playing video games. When I started playing video games, you were in your room, you were by yourself, you were playing against AI, to where fast forward to now, it's very communal. When my son's playing, if we're playing Fortnite, like for great examples. So we play Fortnite at times, like he and I will play, and my college roommate and his son, we will team up at nighttime after we eat dinner. And like we'll play squads. We'll be the 4 of us against 24 other teams playing against us and competing against us in Fortnite. Like it's actually a pretty cool connectivity piece. And so I think if in the wrong hands, unwatched, sure you can go down. You can get too into it, and you need some balance. And we definitely encourage that. And listen, my son is super active. He works out, he swims, he's very active. And so we try to limit the number of hours he's playing games. But I actually think it's a very, it has a sense of community much more so than gaming did when we were growing up.
Yeah. I live with the roommate I live with now because of NBA 2K.
That's so great.
It's kind of hilarious that's how we ended up living together. But let's talk about the trajectory of your career. So where I want to start is, with 6 siblings, I always wonder how the career advice that you get from your parents differs from sibling to sibling, because I feel like basically every person that comes before you is an experiment, and then the parent fixes the mistakes they make on the previous one on the next one.
Yeah, it's a great point. And so going back to my generational, kind of theory earlier, I do think that my parents were much more in the camp of, you're smart enough, go be a lawyer, like go get a good job and so you can provide for your family and put your kids through school. And so that was their mindset. And so I do think that I've spent a lot of my years, as I was starting my career and going through college and then early in my career, really breaking the mold of what they thought was possible and really what they thought was normal. And so, I think I was just always very independent by nature. And so I was determined to make my career, something I was passionate about and following my heart, which was I wanted to be in sports. I wanted to be connected to sports in some way. And so, when I was in high school, I mentioned my obsession with sports and consuming sports media. And I lived in New York at a time when sports radio became a huge medium. And I was listening to Mike and the Mad Dog and that kind of WFAN in New York, and that at that point was more of a local station. And so my total dream going at sports was I wanted to be on sports radio, and I wanted to be and that was my goal, it was my dream, and that was my first job in sports. Was outside of writing for yearbooks and local papers on sports, but when I was in college, I did an internship for sports radio WEEI in Boston, which was it was the equivalent of WFAN in Boston. And so I got a job. I begged my way into that job. A guy I knew at Boston College was working there on the production side, and I basically told him whatever I need to do, I will work for free. Just get me in. And so my junior and senior year of college, I got a job with them. And I will tell you, probably one of the worst jobs in sports was my job was to screen the calls coming in. So I would answer incoming calls. I would kind of find out what somebody wanted to talk about, and then I would send them on to talk to the host. And it was the worst job because you had a sentence of hey, I want to talk about, Barry Bonds. And then you sent that person through, and then they'd get nervous. They'd start stuttering. And then the host would get mad at you for putting them through. So it was a very, very tough job. But that's what led me into sports, though.
Wow. So, I was just looking at your LinkedIn profile. You have this sort of, interesting trajectory of being in charge of ticket sales going all the way to team operations. So numerous things. So first thing, one, what are the lessons that you have taken from, working in the actual NBA that you've applied to 2K? And how is it that a video game has had this much of an impact on our culture? And then I want to talk about specifically esports, like what actually goes into building an esports team and how, you actually run a league. How does it differ from being, for example, David Stern or Adam Silver, your job?
Sure. So, the 2K League offices are essentially inside the NBA office. So it's still very much a part of the NBA. But what I think, and to his credit, what Adam Silver encouraged me to do was to be nimble, to act like a startup. And so I think, even though we are inside the kind of the mothership of the NBA, and we have a ton of influence and a ton of resources from the NBA, I think, what was important for us and for me to make sure I did early on was I had to make sure we were very operational and we were very kind of nimble and quick to make adjustments, and much more nimble and risky, frankly, than the NBA could ever be. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a really early on. I knew we had to be that way, because just to be functional, we only had 8 people running the entire operation the first season. Wow. So yeah. So it was a small operation. And now we're more than double that size. But so that's on the NBA side. As far as what I've learned, I think just learning the value of leadership, and then the value, and because we're a smaller group, the importance of instilling confidence in your team and removing obstacles, letting them do their thing, and then getting out of their way. Because frankly, we had so much to do with such a small group that I never could have been effective if I was trying to hold everyone's hand.
If you're looking for the next best thing to invest in, try investing in your long-term health with Forward. Forward is intelligent medicine with a personal touch. Their doctors are dedicated to catching top killers like cancer and heart disease early, which could save you tens of thousands of dollars in the long run. So invest in a doctor that's invested in you. Visit GoForward.com to learn more about how Forward can help you manage your long-term health risks for one flat monthly fee. That's GoForward.com.
Yeah. So what does the actual business model of the 2K League look like? And how does it compare? Because I'm guessing, unlike sort of, the traditional NBA, it's not, a bunch of college students being recruited to play college ball and then being drafted to the NBA, right? So what does the business model look like? Like, how do you guys make money?
So that is not too dissimilar from the traditional sports model. So it's media rights, it's sponsorship, it's retail, merchandise, and then eventually it'll be more ticket sales. I mean, we were kind of steering in that direction last season, but unfortunately COVID didn't allow for it. So, but ticket sales is definitely a possible revenue stream. So on the business side, it's actually not too dissimilar from kind of the NBA and its affiliate leagues.
Okay.
Where it's tricky is we at the center, we do essentially the recruiting and the player identification for the teams. And so, for example, the first season we opened up tryouts and we had 72,000 people try out.
Holy crap.
Yeah. I mean, so you had 72,000 people trying out for 102 spots. And so, to their credit, 2K developed what we call the Combine, which was a kind of standalone mode in the game, allowed players to go in and play 5-on-5. And so, and kept everybody on an even playing field. Like you mentioned, like trying to build teams and make it fair. We actually have, where every player was a 90 rated player, and they could go in and compete against other 72,000 people. And so we, and again, as far as our resources being limited, what we did was we hired a third party company to essentially build an algorithm that would evaluate players, and we were evaluating 60 different plus stats across every single player in every single game. Wow. I mean, literally millions of data points. And so things down, and it was much, much deeper than points, rebounds, and assists. I mean, we were evaluating, telemetry data and, how good was, how perfect is their jump shot? How good is their release point versus perfect? Their defensive efficiency, their offensive efficiency, like, how often did they go for a steal and put themselves out of position? Like, it's a pretty amazing amount of data we're capturing and still capturing. And so all of that kind of rolled into, we identified about 250 players and then narrowed that down to 102 on draft day. And so our first season, we actually declared the 102 players and the teams drafted them. Now we've evolved our system every year. This past season, we had, I believe it was 285 players that were eligible for the draft to be drafted, and we had roughly, I think, about 60 some odd spots that were drafted on top of the current players who were on rosters. And also to the player identification point, we've also added other elements to our player ID process, such as we now have tryouts in London. We've had a tryout in Hong Kong, in Seoul, Korea. And so we've gone and done tryouts in other countries to identify players around the world. Because if you're in Australia, trying to compete against North American players, your connection is a huge disadvantage. Wow. So we had to find great players and actually invite them to tryouts, physically or remotely in different regions. So that we were able to identify great players around the world. And so the end result is now we have 10 international players on our team rosters. Including this year, we had our first from Spain, our first from Australia. So we were identifying international players. And the other player diversity piece, which is a really interesting story, is on with getting women in the game and finding women. Because what was amazing was our first season, we had the 72,000 players try out. We got down to the final 250, and we only had one woman. And that woman, unfortunately, did not go from the 250 down to the 102. She was eliminated in that process. But we immediately said, okay, well, why is that? Like, well, there's no reason why a woman can't compete in 2K. Why would we not have any women in the league? And so we immediately began our Women in Gaming initiative. And so we did research, we did focus groups with top women, with our GMs. And what we found from the women was that when they played and competed at the highest levels, all of our players wear headsets. I mean, if you're going to play at an elite level, you have to have a headset and communicate with your teammates. And what happened was, as soon as they kind of identified as a woman with a woman's voice, they got passed the ball less.
Wow.
They were harassed at times. It was a kind of a toxic environment for them, and so they were getting passed the ball less often than other their male counterparts. And so, as a result, if we're evaluating statistics, of course, their statistics are going to be less if they're not getting as many opportunities. And so so we then in season 2, we worked with our analytics company to start analyzing players, how effective they were when they actually got the ball. And so it totally changed the dynamic of our analysis. We ended up with a couple women in our draft pool. We had our first woman actually drafted by the Golden State Warriors and Warriors Gaming Squad. And so we kind of broke that barrier in season 2, but our work was far from done. Like, we still had a lot of work to do. And so in season 3, we had 4 women in the draft pool and none of them got drafted. And so that immediately was like, okay, there's something broken here. Like, we're not doing something right. We're not good enough. And so this past off season, our Women in Gaming initiative, what we found out from GMs and coaches was they weren't playing against the top level players. There wasn't enough of enough information or examples of seeing them compete against the top players in the world. So we actually, our Women in Gaming initiative became a much more robust process. We actually went out and we helped identify and helped create 2 top women pro-am teams, so 2 5-on-5 teams that we helped. They entered into the top tournaments. They were competing at the highest levels. So we did that, and then secondarily, we set up these remote gameplay sessions where we had the known best women players in the 2K scene competing with some of our top 2K League pros. Coaches and GMs came in and watched. We had a couple of former 2K League players, pros, coaching the teams, and so that was kind of the second step. And then the third step, which we've now done 2 of them, two consecutive years, is we created a Women in Gaming development camp where we had the top 20 women players that were known in the 2K League 2K scene. We had WNBA players come talk to them. We had top ESports pros, top influencers, kind of talk to them about how to navigate social media and streaming. And then we had them gameplay a ton against each other and also with 2K League pros. And so all of those kind of steps now, this past year, we had I believe it was 9 or 10. I think it was 10 women we had in the draft pool, and we had 2 women drafted this year. And so now we have 2 women currently in the league. And so I will say, like, we still have plenty of work to do, and we're not checking the box by any stretch of the imagination. But what our goal is really is to just, one, get the best players in the world. And we think a diverse pool is a stronger pool. But then number 2 is we're trying to normalize women in the 2K League scene. And so, certainly we want women players, but if you watch our broadcast, we have several women on our broadcast team. If you look at our executive team, some of our top executives of the league are women. And so we're just trying to normalize women in the 2K League scene more broadly. And I think we have taken significant steps in the right direction, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I wanted to ask you about sort of the skill development aspect of this because, my roommate, when he gets on these winning streaks, jokingly, declares himself as the NBA god. And I was like, yeah, you want to see how good you are? Go play a teenager online. Then we'll find out how good you really are. But I remember talking to a friend of mine, and as I was joking with you before we hit record, that, if I ever had FU money, the first thing I would do was buy an NBA basketball team. And one of my friends said, you could potentially buy an esports team. He said that's probably more realistic and probably where we're headed next anyways. So for the esports athletes, like what goes into, their own skill development? Because I doubt it's sort of the way that my roommate and I play. My guess is they're probably they probably have what, Anders Ericsson would have called deliberate practice. Like they're probably doing things to improve.
Totally. And I will say, I mean, that's kind of also that, one is they just play a lot. They do have a unique skill set. They, generally speaking, have an incredibly high basketball IQ. And so they begin to compete at the highest levels. And, and you know how it is. I mean, first you start by being the best player, on your block, then your school, then your area. Like you just start competing more and more at higher levels. And so that scene kind of organically happens also. But I will say, as far as esports goes, I think we're at the early stages of what the right training is for an esports athlete, because I actually think and we're starting to see it more developed. But I think this notion of like just put in the hours and become a master and like just grind and grind and grind, and that's what's going to make you great. I think that's old school. I mean, it's kind of an archaic perspective. Like, I mean, you have to think that, we encourage our players, like many of them work out together and are physically fit. Their nutrition is a consideration. Certainly your eyesight and your hands are, are as important as anything. Like, it's the equivalent of like jumping ability and speed for, an NBA player. So I think we're at the early stages of really what truly good professional skill development is in esports. And I will say it's interesting is, so the only non-NBA owned team in our league so we sold our first franchise outside of the NBA family last year to the Genji Tigers of Shanghai. And Genji, Genji has, and this number has probably changed now, but at the time they had 11 different esports teams across 7 different games. And what they were, and one of the reasons we actually decided to partner with them and actually have them buy a franchise is they were, somewhat tip of the spear in terms of player development in esports. And so they actually run an esports school in Seoul, Korea. And it's truly a remarkable facility. I've been there, and they are developing kind of a balanced attack to they educate, they have education, they have obviously esports development, and so we thought they brought a really unique kind of skill set to the NBA 2K League, and so and one of the things they actually are helping us do is identify 2K players in China to kind of help bring the league and continue to grow the league.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things I wonder about sort of somebody who's got a potentially promising career in esports. So I remember very distinctly, we were stuck at the Dallas airport for 3 or 4 hours after we were teaching a seminar, but my roommate and we just happened to walk by this section. I was like, wait a minute, they have a whole video game section here? And we walk up to the guy, we're like, do you guys have NBA 2K? We have 3 hours. And he's like, yeah, of course we have 2K. So we literally paid $40 to play a game that like we had at home for a couple of hours. But he had started telling us about the fact that now esports is leading to people getting college scholarships, and all sorts of things. So there are 2 questions I have about this. And typically, like when you look at a lot of the NBA athletes, or for that matter, many of the professional sports like the NFL, a lot of these people come from fairly underprivileged backgrounds, right? Tough neighborhoods, poor families. And that is often the path out of poverty for so many of them. But when you're talking about something like esports, an Xbox is not a cheap purchase for the average person. A copy of 2K at this point is about $100. I only know this because I remember thinking, I was like, the target market for video games is not really kids, it's people my age, because for us, $100 is not a big deal. Like we have the disposable income to spend on video games. So what role do you think that privilege plays in the prospects of all these people?
I don't know. I don't think many of our pros come from very challenging, upbringings, and in many cases, very kind of, very I would say very tough backgrounds in terms of like where they grew up and what they had access to. And I think, I think 2K. You're right. A console, is not inexpensive, but I do think a lot of players, maybe share them early on as kids. I think 2K does a pretty good job of making even last year I think they had the game available for a much lower cost. Kind of in the latter part of the NBA season. So I think it's you have to be creative to kind of try to find the right deal, I guess. But I will say like we do not see privilege being an advantage. At least our league makeup, that's not been the case.
Okay, cool. So out of morbid curiosity, this is for my own personal reasons. Can you give me any suggestions on how to put an end to this 15 game losing streak that I've been on?
What's the breakdown? I mean, are you giving up too many threes? Are you breaking down on defense, not getting boards?
I think I would probably say I'm not passing enough, and I'm probably shooting way too many threes.
Yeah, right. Well, listen, that sounds like a problem. You may have to get into the get a little practice in on your three ball, or maybe change the sliders when he's not looking, so they're easier to make.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned that you had sold a team. I mean, so this is, back to that idea, for somebody who's aspiring to own a sports team, as crazy as that might sound, because most of us are not, Mark Cuban, with enough money to buy the Mavericks. Are esports teams going to be something that we start to see over and over? And what is happening on sort of the college recruiting path? Do you guys recruit from college, and what's happening in terms of opportunities that are being created outside of just playing the game? What kinds of opportunities has this created for people who play?
So kind of a little bit similar to my point on player development. I still think esports, it's such early days that everyone's trying to figure out what their place is in esports. And so I think it's gonna continue to become a more prominent recruiting tool for colleges. I think you're already starting to see it, but seeing kind of college programs develop as kind of a tool to recruit students. Because I will say, I mean, generally speaking, esports enthusiasts are very tech savvy. They're they generally are high IQ. So it's an interesting audience for colleges to get in front of. And so I think you're going to continue to see that develop. And I even say we're trying to figure this out right now we're trying to put a little more structure around just the grassroots competitive scene, because in order for us to be successful, it's not enough for us to have the top 138 players in the world. We have to continue to develop that next part and frankly, the wider part of the funnel, which is the, over 2 million players that are literally playing the game, like yourself, probably 2 million players playing every day that are super competitive, but maybe they're not good enough to be in that 138. But as we grow, we want to make sure that is a big part of our audience. And so we want to make that group feel connected to the 2K League and have a reason to watch it. And so that's really a big area of focus for us, is trying to figure out, just how do we appeal to that next tier of competitive of the competitive scene. And so yeah, I think your point on colleges, I think we're seeing high schools also now.
I was going to ask you about that. That was my next question: is this starting to make its way into primary education?
It definitely is, and I think some of it is also trying to figure out what's the right entry point for a school. And I will say, 2K, we're very lucky in that. Listen, 2K it's rated E for everyone. It's not as controversial a choice as some other games might be, especially for a high school. So I do think you're going to see 2K's kind of grassroots community continue to grow as esports grows. And then the other really, I would call this a significant advantage, is because in 2K and in the NBA 2K game is going to be the best basketball game in esports. And it's going to be for a long time, because, obviously given the fact that we, it is the best game. And so as opposed to, some of the other games out there, it's a very competitive marketplace. And to maintain your status as the game to play, kudos to the games that are on top right now, but they always have kind of other, game developers kind of, creating what's next. I mean, Fortnite really, was kind of come on the scene the last, couple of years. But it was a minute ago that PUBG was dominating that space. And then Fortnite came along and has been incredibly successful at building an audience.
Wow. Well, so, the thing that I had noticed, and I think I'd mentioned this to you, is that I've been playing this game for 20 years. And I couldn't believe that when I sat down and looked at it. I was like, wait a minute, I have played this game since 2K1. And my friend Ryan Holiday, whose work you might be familiar with, written a bunch of different books, all of which are New York Times bestsellers. He wrote this book called Perennial Seller, which is about how to make something that is timeless and something that lasts. And, I know, like you said, when you think of, a basketball video game, 2K is the first thing that anybody defaults to. What do you think it is that has led to that kind of dominance, the sort of perennial seller nature of 2K? And what do you think creative people can take away from that?
I would say for 2K, it's to their credit, is like, there's not many games that come out with an annual version of the game. And so, most times there's a couple of years kind of, a breathing room in between releases. And so to their credit, I mean, the 2K development team, like they have an insatiable appetite to continue to improve the game. And whether, and they've, even the last couple of years, the way in which they added the neighborhood and the whole neighborhood experience, and like, and having different modes of the game to play. If you want to go play in the park, if you want to play team up, you want to play pro-am, like there's so many different modes of the game to, and it's the whole, I would say for marketers in general, it's the entire movement towards direct to consumer and really allowing the consumer to dictate their experience. And they want it to be customized. They want it to be personal. And I think 2K has done a brilliant job over the last several years of doing exactly that, of really customizing what the player wants. And so I think that's really been one of the, and I will say, like, it's one of the reasons why, like, it's not only a great selling game, it's also a game that has incredible engagement numbers. I mean, a lot of these players are playing 30 plus hours a week, and that doesn't happen unless you are creating something that's engaging enough.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, because I think I'd be horrified if I actually looked at how many hours we play every week. So, we have the three of us that live together. Two of us play it, and our other roommate hates the fact that we play this game so damn much.
That's awesome. No, it's true. And then, the other point I was going to make, and I didn't touch on earlier, which you were kind of talking about, and I think I might have gone off on a different tangent, is you mentioned kind of, the value of esports and how it's changing kind of the educational experience. I would say the biggest surprise I've had of the 2K League is that, listen, certainly we've identified the best 138 players in the world. They're incredible, and they are amazing at what they do. But we've created, probably at least that number, if not more, of jobs connected to the 2K League. And so whether you are, what traditional sports calls announcers, we call casters. So if you're doing play-by-play or color commentary, you're doing sideline reporting. We have an entire broadcast team. We have content creators. We have, media. There's obviously sponsor and then all the traditional jobs of sponsorship, sales, marketing, community development, etc. So I will say that, like, I think where I find esports very exciting for someone who's been in the sports industry for, over 2 decades. What I find exciting about esports is that it's truly creating a whole new branch of the business that's creating a ton of jobs.
Yeah. Well, I before we hit record, you had told me that you had known Scott for 20 years, and the story of how you met was actually cool. So how did you guys meet?
Yeah, so my first, so I was an intern for the Boston Celtics after I graduated Boston College. I interned for the Celtics, got a job and then they helped me get a job with the Detroit Pistons and Palace Sports. Soon after I graduated college. And so I was selling for the Pistons, and I was, one of probably, it was a massive sales organization, probably 60 sellers. And so Scott he actually was in a group called Team Marketing and Business Operations, which is a kind of a McKinsey style, consulting group for the NBA that David Stern started, and it was to help the teams with sharing best practices and being effective off the court. And so Scott was essentially the Pistons representative, so he would come into market and visit. And so I was just a generic seller, and so normally I would not get the opportunity. Generally, someone like Scott would come in and he'd meet with all the senior executives, and so for some, he and I actually, we played hoops in the morning. He would try to organize a basketball game when he came to town, and so we actually got to we competed against each other. We guarded each other, kind of playing hoops before the workday began, and then he agreed to give me a half hour and meet with me, and so that really started like. From that point, he kind of helped connect me. I took a job with the Milwaukee Bucks, and then eventually, in New Orleans with then the Hornets, and then I became very connected to that Teambo operation. And then, ironically, I actually I left the team side of the business after 12 years when I was with the Atlanta Hawks and Thrashers in Atlanta. I actually ironically took a job in Teambo in the NBA League office. I call it probably was 10 years after I met Scott.
Wow. I feel like I could talk to you about this for hours on end, but that's only because I'm obsessed with this game. Probably not as much as I doubt my listeners are as obsessed with it as I am. So I have one final question for you, which is how we finish all of our interviews, the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
What's the last question? You stumped me.
Yeah. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
I think it's legacy. I think it's the impact you have on the people around you. And I hope that my team or people I've worked with and managed over the years. One thing, and frankly, I actually may have got this a little bit from Scott and learning from him and other mentors I've had over the years, is I am very obsessed with talent and the development of talent. And listen, I will be very constructively critical of my team, but I think I get a lot of latitude with them because they know I care about them. I mean, I genuinely love my team, and they know it. And so as a result, I think they know that like I'm coming from a good place, and they can trust me, and they know that I'm just trying to help them get better and make a bigger impact and think bigger. And so I would say it's if you're not constructively helping your team grow, you're not giving them your best. And so I would say like that's a pretty big trait, I think, of leaders, that I think they should make sure they stay true to themselves, but they make sure that they're helping their team get better.
Wow. Well, this has been amazing and fascinating and funny and insightful all at the same time. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and your wisdom and insights with all listeners. Where can people find out more about you, your work, and everything else that you're up to?
Listen, I mean, obviously, our NBA2KLeague.com is our website, but I would say that I am very active on Twitter. I am 2K League MD on Twitter, and so feel free to follow me there. And I'll try to put some thought into maybe some nuggets of wisdom. I will say I now follow you, so I'm looking forward to to seeing what else. I listened to Scott's interview. I want to listen to some of the others you've had on your podcast.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.
Choose NetJets, the worldwide leader in private aviation, to ensure safe, seamless business travel. Thoughtful in-cabin design and cutting-edge technology allow you to continue meeting even with those on the ground. Reliable travel with NetJets means in-person opportunities are never missed again. While we continue investing in our response to COVID-19, you can remain focused on doing what's best for your business. For help finding a solution that's right for you, speak with a private aviation specialist at netjets.com.